Hello and welcome to today's video where I will be working in my husband's blacksmith shop making dress hooks. And in case you missed my last video, this is an idea of what a dress hook looks like. This is an actual dress hook from the 16th century, and this is what I'm looking to make today. In fact, I'm hoping to make two to attach to a cord to put around my waist to hold my skirts up. But before we get started in the blacksmith shop, please remember to select subscribe to be updated when new videos come out. So, welcome to my husband's blacksmith shop, and after some discussion with him, I'm actually going to let him teach this class.
Silver gilt is pure silver, or probably more like sterling, that has been gilded with a process called fire gilding. So you would have your silver object, it's probably cast, and you'll work your less precious metal and then cover it in an amalgam of gold and mercury. In fact, that's where we get the term amalgam. We use that as a catch-all term for any combination of materials, but a true amalgam is a mixture of gold dissolved into mercury. And you create what was called butter of gold, because it really looked like warm, spreadable butter. And that's exactly how you'd spread it on your base object. You could gild anything, but silver gilt was silver coated in butter of gold. You put it on with a paintbrush and then heat it over a fire to evaporate the mercury, and all you were left with was gold. This process was called fire gilding. It is almost entirely abandoned now, except for rare cases of historical preservation or direct recreation of I know the royal family in the armories does still commission some fire gilt pieces, but it's considered hideously dangerous now. Was it? It's a matter of perspective. If you were doing it outdoors in an area of good ventilation, certainly one wasn't going to harm you. But the gilt object would still contain traces of mercury, and that would come off during handling. So your silver gilt object was a silver object that looked like a gold object. We're going to be using brass. We'll be using brass. It will appear gold when it's polished. This is a piece of 10 gauge scrap. We'll be able to make a pretty good historical approximation with brass. It was certainly a common period material. Cupric alloys in period were referred to as Latin, L-A-T-T-E-N, Latin or latin. Before the Renaissance, the science of creating alloys was not well understood, and there was an awful lot of there were obscure techniques that were much more mainstream at the time. It would add what we would now consider strange, very exotic alloying elements like arsenic or lead to alloys. And what they were doing was preventing undesirable effects. They were allowing the resultant alloy to flow into a mold easier, or they were reducing bubbles, or they were making the alloy self-fluxing. So what we think of as brass, the zinc copper alloy, was rare. Also, what we think of as bronze, as a tin copper alloy, was also surprisingly rare. Tin was used, yes, absolutely, but there would almost always be additional alloying elements like antimony and arsenic, which makes a perfectly good bronze. Arsenic bronze is you use about 15% arsenic with copper. You'll wind up with a very good bronze. It's a little brittle, but for pots and such. Of course, the arsenic is trapped in the metal. It doesn't become poisonous in that state. But so all cupric alloys were pretty much referred to as Latin until the late Renaissance, when the science of metallurgy progressed because of developments of furnaces. Here we have an original example of a dress hook. This looks like some kind of copper alloy to me. It looks like it's brass. It's certainly not silver, but it's about 1 inch and a piece long. It's about, well, 5/8 of an inch wide. But the collections of original examples indicate that about 1.5 inches long is about as much as we want. About 3/4 of an inch wide, maybe 1 inch wide, is about as much as we want. So I have a piece of scrap brass here, and this is a top and bottom die that I made for an old project making a Roman cingulum military belt. And it presses out holes or bumps kind of like this to give it a little bit of dimensionality. Smaller, of course. And so that's what we're going to do. We'll make a button shape to be the center of our piece, and then we will cut around it to give us sewing loops and the dress hook. So that's how we're going to start. Just going to roughly mark out where to put my dies when it's under the press. That's close enough. It's not exact. It doesn't have to be. They're self-centering. If they're off a little bit, if they're off a lot, it'll just smash the metal. But if they're off a little bit, they'll push themselves into place. And we have a nice round bezel. So we'll do that again. So we're going to take these dies and make something just like this by pressing them together. So okay, I'm going to do that again, because what happened was that the dies were a little bit misaligned and they actually tore the brass. That's not what we want, so we'll just hit it again. There we go. Much better. There's a lot of ways we could cut this. These are aviation snips. They cut reasonably well, but I'm actually going to cut them apart with a saw. Now, if we look at the existing artifact, we have remnants of what I think were fairly obviously sewing holes. So we're going to surround the bezel with, looks like 8 sewing holes. So we'll just give ourselves order, and we can use the impression of the die that we use to press our bezel as a guide. This will be the hook. It'll actually be quite a bit wider than that. So there are holes here, 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 here. and here. And now we have to cut that out. Alright, we've roughed out the shape. We need to trim it up a little bit, make it a little more even. You can see from the back, it's not pretty. I'm going to make it pretty. Now we have our mostly edge ground dress hook. But we need to thicken the hook because it's out of very thin stock. Even though 10 gauge is fairly thick as sheet metal goes, we want it to be a little thicker than that to match the historical examples. So we're going to heat this up and we're going to beat it down. Okay, so after about a dozen repetitions, we turn this into this, and we're going to do that again. Okay, after cleaning these up, the holes, our marks for our holes just disappeared, so we're going to remark those. And once again, at our cardinal points. And at the corners. Don't like that one. Better. Now I think we'll probably be making a kind of a rosette or flower shape out of this. Once the holes are drilled. And we can rough that in with a grinder, but that really needs to be file work. So, probably something like that. And we'll do the same thing with this one. About like that. There we go. Pair of 16th century dress hooks.
I hope you enjoyed this video watching my husband make me these wonderful dress hooks. If you have any questions, please post them in the comments below. Select thumbs up if you like the video, and as always, please subscribe.